I sat alone in my new sunroom, watching dust particles dance in the afternoon light, holding the fountain pen Franklin had given me on our 30th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using it to sign the lease on my modest apartment, while across town, my son Thomas was likely still standing in our family home's entryway, his face frozen in disbelief as our family lawyer revealed the truth. The sprawling Victorian mansion he'd been pressuring me to transfer for estate planning purposes had already been sold 3 weeks ago for $2.1 million cash, and I hadn't kept a penny of it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the stained glass panels that bordered my bedroom windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the antique quilt that had covered my bed for the past 42 years. I'd always loved this time of day in the old Victorian, the way sunlight transformed the ordinary into something magical, if only for a few moments. I ran my fingers across the quilt's intricate stitching, following the pattern that Eleanor, my grandmother, had created during the Depression era. This house had been filled with these touchstones of history, not valuable to most, perhaps, but priceless to me. Franklin had understood that when he bought this place all those years ago, surprising me with keys on my 35th birthday. "Martha," he'd said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "I found something as sturdy and beautiful as you." That was Franklin's way. Romantic gestures wrapped in practical packaging. The house had needed work then. Peeling wallpaper, creaking, floors, plumbing that protested with alarming groans. But we'd restored it room by room, weekend by weekend, turning the rambling Victorian into a home where we raised our son Thomas, and later, welcomed our grandchildren for summer visits and holiday gatherings. Franklin had been gone for 5 years now. Cancer, swift and merciless. Sometimes I still reached across the bed in early morning fog, momentarily forgetting I was alone. The house had grown quieter, larger somehow, in his absence. The rooms that once barely contained our life together now echoed with my solitary footsteps. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, wincing slightly at the arthritic twinge in my right knee. 73 wasn't ancient, but it certainly wasn't young. The mirror across the room reflected a woman with silver hair cut in a practical bob, laugh lines that had deepened into permanence, and eyes that had seen enough of life to know its value. "Another day, Eleanor," I murmured to my grandmother's quilt. It was a habit I'd developed since Franklin's passing, talking to the objects that connected me to my past, as if they could answer back, provide company. The morning routine never varied. Earl Grey tea with a splash of milk, toast with marmalade, and the crossword puzzle from yesterday's newspaper. I'd always been one day behind the world, Franklin used to tease. Today, I didn't mind the delay. News moved too quickly these days anyway, all of it urgent, little of it important. The kitchen was my favorite renovation. We'd opened up the space, added windows overlooking the garden, installed the cherry cabinets. Franklin had crafted himself. He'd been talented that way, turning raw materials into something both beautiful and functional. Thomas hadn't inherited that particular gift. My son's talents ran toward numbers, toward the accumulation of things rather than their creation. The thought of Thomas brought a familiar heaviness. He'd been calling more frequently in the past few months, his voice carrying that particular tone of forced patience he used when he wanted something. "Mom, have you thought more about downsizing? That house is just too much for you to manage alone." The concern sounded genuine enough, but I recognized the calculation behind it. Thomas had never approved of my decision to donate most of Franklin's life insurance money to the Community College Scholarship Fund. "Dad would have wanted security for you," he'd argued. What he meant was security for himself. The unspoken expectation that whatever Franklin and I had built would eventually flow to him, like a birthright. I carried my tea to the garden, settling into the wrought iron chair Franklin had positioned. Perfectly. Just enough sun in the morning, just enough shade by afternoon. The roses were blooming, especially the peace variety Franklin had planted the year Thomas was born. Something that will grow along with our family, he'd said, kneeling in the dirt, his hands gently packing soil around the young plant. The roses had outlived him, their blooms just as vibrant, just as persistent. I wondered if they would outlive me too, continuing to flower for strangers who might buy this house someday, who would never know the history contained in each carefully tended bush. My phone buzzed from my pocket. Thomas again. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever he wanted to discuss could wait until Sunday dinner. He'd been insisting on weekly family meals lately, bringing his wife Caroline and their teenage children, Eliza and James. The dinners followed a pattern, pleasant conversation through the main course. Then Thomas would send the kids to another room, and the real agenda would emerge. Mom, Caroline and I have been talking with our financial advisor. Or, Mom, have you considered how complicated probate can be? Each conversation circling around the same unspoken point: the house, the assets, the inheritance, the eager anticipation poorly disguised as concern. I finished my tea and returned to the kitchen, where my calendar hung beside the refrigerator. Today's square was marked with a single notation: Lockwood, 2 p.m. Richard Lockwood had been Franklin's attorney, then mine after Franklin passed. A serious man with kind eyes who never rushed our conversations, who answered my questions with thoughtful consideration rather than legal jargon. I had met with him 3 times in the past month, each meeting carefully arranged for times when Thomas would be at work, unavailable to offer to come along and help understand the legal details. Richard had been surprised at first by my questions, then supportive of my decisions. "It's your property, Martha," he'd said simply. "You've earned the right to determine its best use." I checked my watch. Nearly 10 a.m. I had several hours before my appointment, time enough to gather what I needed. From the hallway closet, I retrieved the carved wooden box that held our most important documents: deed to the house, Franklin's will, our marriage certificate, Thomas's birth certificate. The small treasures that officially documented a life's most significant moments. The box had a false bottom, something Franklin had designed when he made it for our 25th anniversary. "Every marriage needs a few secrets," he'd winked. Beneath the hidden panel lay an envelope containing new documents, the results of my meetings with Richard. Papers that would change everything. I ran my fingers across the embossed stationery, feeling the slight ridge of the law office letterhead. Inside was the culmination of careful planning, of quiet research conducted during library afternoons, and late nights online. Planning that Thomas knew nothing about, would never have expected from his traditional mother who still wrote checks instead of using online banking and preferred physical books to e-readers. The doorbell chimed, startling me from my thoughts. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could make out the silhouette of Sophia, my next-door neighbor for the past 30 years. I tucked the envelope back into its hiding place and went to greet her, pushing thoughts of the afternoons, meeting temporarily aside. For now, I would simply be Martha Jenkins, widow, gardener, neighbor. In a few hours, I would become something else entirely. A woman with a shocking revelation up her sleeve, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most overlooked people are capable of the most unexpected actions. The familiar chime of my cell phone interrupted the peaceful afternoon. Thomas's name flashed on the screen. The 3rd call today. With a sigh, I answered. "Mom." Finally. His voice carried that particular blend of relief and irritation I'd grown accustomed to. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I've been busy, Thomas." I continued arranging the white hydrangeas I'd cut from the garden, cradling the phone between my ear and shoulder. "Listen, something's come up. A really exciting opportunity." The eagerness in his voice triggered a familiar wariness in me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas's exciting opportunities usually benefited him far more than anyone else. Jason, you remember Jason Keller? From my firm. Just closed on a vacation property in Maine, oceanfront. They got it for a steal because the market's soft up there right now. I made a non-committal sound, wondering where this was heading. It got me thinking about estate planning, he continued, his voice shifting into what I called his financial advisor tone, slightly deeper, more authoritative. We should really talk about getting your affairs in order. Dad's been gone 5 years now, and we haven't properly restructured anything. My affairs are perfectly in order, Thomas. I tried to keep the edge from my voice. Richard Lockwood has helped me with everything I need. Lockwood? Thomas didn't hide his dismissal. Mom, he's practically retired. Our firm works with Marshall and Greenberg now. Top-notch estate attorneys. They have strategies that could save us, save you, thousands in taxes. I noted the slip. Save us. But let it pass. I'm comfortable with Richard. At least let me bring someone from M&G to Sunday dinner. No pressure, just to outline some options. He paused. The housing market's really strong right now, especially for historic properties in established neighborhoods. Your house has probably appreciated substantially, and there it was, the true purpose of the call. The house. Always the house. I'll think about it, I said, not committing. How are Eliza and James? The conversation shifted to my grandchildren's activities. James's debate team victory, Eliza's college tours, safer territory. After we hung up, I sat with the hydrangeas half arranged, contemplating the subtext of Thomas's call. The housing market, estate planning, taxes, all roads leading to the same destination, transferring ownership of my home into a trust or some other vehicle Thomas would ultimately control. He'd been floating variations of this suggestion for months now, each approach slightly different but the underlying goal unchanged. I walked to the hallway mirror, studying my reflection. The woman looking back appeared exactly as Thomas saw me. An aging widow, perhaps becoming fragile, certainly in need of guidance from her financially savvy son. But the eyes that looked back held something Thomas consistently overlooked: determination. Franklin had seen it. That stubborn spark, he'd called it, not as criticism, but with admiration. You look like you'd happily move mountains with a teaspoon if someone told you it couldn't be done. The memory brought a smile to my face. Franklin had understood me in ways Thomas never had, perhaps never tried to. Thomas saw what he expected to see: a traditional mother who'd centered her life around family, who'd never pursued a career, beyond part-time bookkeeping for local businesses, who still used recipe cards instead of cooking apps. What he didn't see was the woman who'd managed the restoration of a historic home while raising a child, who'd invested carefully alongside Franklin for decades, who'd read financial journals with the same interest as gardening magazines. Thomas remembered the cookies after school but forgot who had taught him to balance his first checkbook. My cell phone pinged with a text message, Sophia from next door. Coffee tomorrow? Brought back some special blend from my daughters in Seattle. The invitation sparked an idea. Sophia had been widowed nearly a decade before me. She'd navigated this territory already. The subtle and not-so-subtle pressure from adult children who believed they knew best, who saw their aging parent as someone to be managed rather than consulted. I texted back, "Yes, need your advice about something." Making my way to Franklin's office, still Franklin's in my mind, though I'd been using it exclusively for years, I unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out the leather portfolio I'd been assembling. Inside were printouts of property, listings, market analyses, and notes from conversations with 3 different realtors. Also tucked inside was a brochure from Lakeside Haven, a retirement community 20 miles away that I'd visited twice in recent weeks. Not the sterile, hospital-like setting Thomas probably imagined when he suggested I downsize to somewhere more manageable, but an active community of gardens, walking paths, and independent living spaces surrounding a small lake. I'd been impressed. During my tours, impressed enough to have put down a refundable deposit on a sunny corner unit with a large balcony perfect for container gardening. The director, Evelyn Chambers, had shown me their community workshop where residents built birdhouses and repaired furniture, their extensive library, and the commercial kitchen where residents could take cooking classes or host family gatherings. Most people think places like this are about giving things up, Evelyn had said as we walked the grounds. We see it differently. It's about trading what no longer serves you for what does. The concept had resonated with me. This house, beautiful, historic, filled with memories, had begun to feel like an elegant anchor, tethering me to the past while requiring increasing amounts of my energy to maintain. The property taxes alone had doubled since Franklin and I first moved in. I added Sunday's date to my calendar with a simple note. Decision. Thomas's increasing pressure had forced a timeline I might not have chosen, but perhaps that was for the best. 5 years of widowhood, of rattling around in rooms designed for a family, of climbing stairs that grew steeper with each passing year. Perhaps it was time, but not in the way Thomas envisioned. My appointment with Richard Lockwood was in an hour. I gathered my portfolio, added the morning's property tax assessment that had arrived in the mail, and placed everything in my structured leather handbag. Another of Franklin's gifts, this one from our trip to Florence 15 years ago. For a woman who knows her own mind, he'd said, presenting the buttery soft bag over dinner in a tiny trattoria. As I prepared to leave, I paused at the hallway table where a silver-framed photograph showed Thomas at his law school graduation, flanked by Franklin and me, all of us beaming with pride. I touched the image of my son's younger face gently. "You're not a bad person," I whispered to the photograph. "Just used to getting your way." The grandfather clock in the foyer, a wedding gift from Franklin's parents, chimed once, marking the half hour. Time to go. I tucked the house key into my purse, straightened my shoulders, and stepped out into the summer afternoon, pulling. The heavy oak door firmly closed behind me. Today would set in motion changes that Thomas couldn't possibly anticipate. Changes that would reveal exactly who I was, not who he thought I was. Richard Lockwood's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian similar to my own home. Unlike modern law practices with their gleaming glass and steel, Lockwood and Associates embraced its heritage: dark wood paneling, oriental rugs over hardwood floors, and lighting that cast a warm glow rather than the harsh fluorescence of corporate environments. Richard stood as I entered, coming around his substantial desk to greet me. At 78, he moved with the careful precision of someone who refused to be hurried by age. His white hair and bow tie gave him an air of another era, which was precisely why I trusted him. Richard had seen enough of life to understand its complexities. "Martha," he clasped my hand between both of his. "Right on time, as always." Punctuality was Franklin's influence, I smiled. He used to say being late was just borrowing someone else's time without permission. Richard nodded appreciatively. "Sounds like Franklin. Please sit." I settled into the leather chair opposite his desk, placing my portfolio on my lap. Richard returned to his seat, adjusting his reading glasses as he pulled a folder marked Jenkins Martha E. from a neat stack. "I've prepared everything as we discussed," he said, opening the folder. "The sale agreement for 1847 Maple Avenue, with the terms we outlined. The buyers have already signed their portion and transferred the earnest money to our escrow account." He slid a multi-page document across the desk. The first page bore the letterhead of Crawford Realty, with purchase agreement in bold type across the top. The amount listed, $235,000 still startled me, though I'd agreed to it weeks ago. Are you certain about the price? I asked, not for the first time. Thomas always believed the house would sell for more if we waited. Richard removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. The Crawford assessment was thorough, Martha. Yes, you might get marginally more if you renovated the kitchen and bathrooms to current tastes. But that investment might not pay for itself. And the Hernandez family is offering cash, no contingencies, with a closing date flexible to your needs. That kind of certainty has value beyond the dollar amount. I nodded, remembering my meeting with Elena and Miguel Hernandez. A surgeon and a literature professor with 3 children, they'd fallen in love with the house's character, its garden, its history. Elena had teared up when describing how she imagined their children growing up in those rooms. I'd known immediately they were the right family for my home. And the other arrangements? I asked. Richard pulled additional documents from his folder. The deposit for Lakeside Haven is confirmed. Once the house closes, the remaining funds will be distributed according to your instructions. The trust for your grandchildren's education, the donation to the Historical Preservation Society, and the remainder to your new investment accounts. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And Thomas won't know any of this until after it's done? Richard's expression softened. As your attorney, I'm bound by confidentiality. The buyers understand your situation and have agreed to discretion. The sale won't appear in public records until after closing. He hesitated. Are you certain about not telling Thomas until then? In my experience, surprises in family matters rarely end well. I opened my portfolio and removed a stack of emails I'd printed, messages from Thomas to his financial advisor that he'd accidentally copied me on. Messages discussing Mom's house and potential liquidity once we convince her to transfer the deed. Richard reviewed them silently, his expression darkening. I see, he said finally. This certainly contextualizes your concerns. Thomas isn't a bad person, I said, feeling the need to defend my son despite everything. He's simply convinced himself that he knows what's best for me, for the family assets. This approach seems kinder than a confrontation that would damage our relationship beyond repair. Richard nodded slowly. Very well. All that's needed today is your signature on these documents, and everything proceeds as planned. He slid a pen toward me, a sleek, heavy instrument that reminded me of the fountain pen Franklin had given me years ago. I signed each page where indicated, feeling a curious mixture of liberation and loss with each stroke of the pen. This house had been more than wood and plaster. It had been the setting for the most significant chapters of my life. Yet as my signature confirmed the sale, I felt tension I'd carried for months begin to dissolve. What will you tell Thomas when you begin packing? Richard asked as he carefully organized the signed documents. That I've decided to downsize, just as he's been suggesting. He'll be pleased initially. He knows nothing about Lakeside Haven. He assumes any move would be to a condo he could help select, preferably near his own home. I smiled thinly. He'll be surprised by my independence, but that's a lesson he's apparently needed to learn. Richard walked me to the door, resting a supportive hand briefly on my shoulder. Franklin would be proud of your courage, Martha. Franklin always saw me more clearly than our son does, I replied softly. The afternoon sun was warm as I left Richard's office, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I had 2 weeks before the closing, 2 weeks to sort through a lifetime of possessions, to decide what would accompany me to my new life and what would remain with the old. I drove to Sophia's house rather than returning home, needing the perspective of a friend who understood the complex emotions attached to such transitions. She answered the door in gardening clothes, soil still fresh under her fingernails. It's done, I said simply as she ushered me inside. I've sold the house. Her eyes widened. Without telling Thomas? He'll know soon enough. I sank into her comfortable sofa, suddenly exhausted. Am I being cruel, Sophia? Selling our family? Home without consulting him? She sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. "Martha Jenkins, you've spent your entire life considering others first. Franklin, Thomas, your community. This time, you're considering yourself. There's nothing cruel about that." I nodded, grateful for her certainty. "I need to start packing tomorrow. There's so much to sort through, 42 years of accumulation." "I'll help," Sophia promised. "We'll tackle it together, one room at a time." That evening, I walked slowly through each room of my house, soon to be someone else's house. I touched door frames Franklin had installed, curtains I'd sewn, wallpaper we'd selected together. Each space held memories, whispers of laughter and tears, of milestones and mundane moments alike. In Thomas's childhood bedroom, now a guest room, rarely used, I opened the closet where a pencil growth chart still marked the wall, measurements from ages 5 through 17, when he'd proudly surpassed his father's height. I traced the highest mark with my fingertip, remembering Thomas's triumphant grin that day. "I'm not erasing you," I whispered, as if he could hear me. "I'm just writing a new chapter you didn't expect." I closed the closet door gently and continued my farewell tour, saying goodbye to the house that had sheltered me through the seasons of my life, making peace with the decision to release it into another family's care. It was time to pack away the past, not in bitterness but in gratitude, and step unburdened into whatever remained of my future. The following Sunday arrived with perfect late summer weather, clear skies, gentle breeze, temperatures mild enough to open windows. I'd spent the week quietly sorting through possessions, creating careful piles, items to take to Lakeside Haven, family heirlooms for Thomas and the grandchildren, donations for the Historical Society, and pieces to sell or give away. Sophia had helped each afternoon, bringing empty boxes from her son-in-law's store and steady reassurance when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. "Keep what brings you joy," she advised, echoing advice from some organizing expert she'd read. "The rest is just stuff." I hadn't told Thomas about my decision yet. Today's dinner would be the moment. Not the full revelation, but the first step. I'd prepared his favorite meal, pot roast with rosemary potatoes, honey-glazed carrots, and apple pie for dessert. Traditional comfort food that would, I hoped, soften the initial shock of my announcement. At precisely 5 o'clock, Thomas's black SUV pulled into the driveway. Caroline stepped out first, elegant as always in tailored slacks and a silk blouse, carrying a bouquet of store-bought flowers. Thomas followed, checking something on his phone before tucking it into his jacket pocket. The children emerged last, James, 16 and already taller than his father, and Eliza, 14, with earbuds firmly in place. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Right on time," I smiled, accepting Caroline's air kiss and the flowers. "Everything's ready." "Mom, before we eat, I'd like you to meet someone," Thomas said, gesturing toward a silver sedan, pulling up behind his vehicle. "I mentioned bringing someone from Marshall and Greenberg, remember? This is Alan Prescott, their senior estate planning attorney." A middle-aged man in an expensive suit emerged from the car, carrying a leather portfolio similar to the one I'd taken to Richard Lockwood, though considerably newer. My smile froze, but I maintained composure. "Thomas, we agreed to discuss this after dinner," I said quietly. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I thought it would be more efficient this way. Alan had availability, and he's brought some preliminary documents for us to review." I considered my options quickly. Making a scene would only reinforce Thomas's perception of me as someone needing management. Instead, I nodded politely. "Mr. Prescott can join us for dinner, but we'll save business discussions for afterward. The roast shouldn't wait." Thomas looked like he might protest, but Caroline placed a restraining hand on his arm. "That sounds perfect, Martha. The food smells wonderful." Dinner proceeded with surface-level pleasantries. Alan Prescott made appropriate comments about the historic features of my home, complimented the meal, and asked the children generic questions about school and activities. I observed him carefully. Competent, undoubtedly, but with the slightly aggressive edge common to attorneys who measured success by billable hours rather than client well-being. After dessert, Caroline suggested the children help clear the table. "Why don't you take that apple pie home with you?" I offered, knowing neither Thomas nor Caroline would touch the remaining slices. "James and Eliza can enjoy it tomorrow." Once the kitchen was tidy, Thomas gestured toward the living room. "Shall we discuss business now?" I nodded, leading the way to the formal sitting area rarely used since Franklin's passing. Thomas directed me to my usual armchair while he and Alan took positions on the sofa opposite, creating an unconsciously adversarial arrangement. Caroline perched on the window seat, present but peripheral. "Mom," Thomas began, using the carefully modulated tone that irritated me most. "Alan has prepared some documents that would help protect your assets, especially this house, while minimizing estate taxes when the time comes." Alan opened his portfolio, extracting a sheaf of papers. "Mrs. Jenkins, based on the information Thomas has provided, I've drafted a proposed trust structure that would transfer ownership of this property while guaranteeing you lifetime residency rights." I folded my hands in my lap, maintaining a neutral expression. "That's very thorough of you, Mr. Prescott, especially considering we've never spoken directly about my financial situation or my wishes." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Thomas indicated you were interested in exploring options. Actually," I interrupted gently, "I've made some decisions of my own regarding my future living arrangements." Thomas leaned forward, brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "I've decided to sell this house and move to Lakeside Haven." The silence that followed was profound. Thomas stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Caroline's eyebrows rose slightly. In surprise or appreciation, I couldn't tell. "Lakeside Haven?" Thomas recovered first. "That retirement community out by the interstate? Mom, you can't be serious. Those places are quite lovely." "Actually," I finished for him, "I've visited twice. They have a garden club, a workshop similar to your father's, and residences designed specifically for aging in place." But this house," Thomas sputtered. "It's been in our family for decades. We've always planned—" "You've always planned," I corrected gently. "Franklin and I purchased this house together. We never discussed keeping it indefinitely." Thomas turned to Alan Prescott as if seeking support. The attorney closed his portfolio, recognizing the shifting terrain. "When exactly did you make this decision?" Thomas demanded, his professional demeanor slipping. "I've been considering it for some time," I replied, not yet revealing the signed sale agreement. "The house requires increasing maintenance. The property, taxes continue to rise. I could help with those things. We've talked about this. If you'd just sign the property into a trust, we could manage everything for you." I noted the "we" and wondered if Thomas even realized how transparent his motives had become. "I appreciate your concern," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But I've decided this is best for me. I've already contacted a realtor to discuss listing the property." This wasn't precisely true. I'd gone well beyond discussing with Crawford Realty, but it seemed unwise to reveal the full extent of my actions just yet. Caroline spoke for the first time. "Martha, have you found a place at Lakeside that interests you? When would you move?" I smiled at her, grateful for the practical question that de-escalated Thomas's growing agitation. "There's a lovely corner unit with a balcony for container gardening. As for timing, that depends on how quickly the house sells." Thomas stood abruptly, pacing toward the fireplace where family photos chronicled decades of our history. "I can't believe you'd make such a major decision without consulting me. After everything Dad and I have done to preserve this place—" "Thomas," I interrupted, firmness entering my voice, "I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of my decision." His head snapped around, surprise evident. It occurred to me that this might be the first time in our adult relationship that I directly contradicted his advice. Alan Prescott, sensing the tension, quietly excused himself to wait in his car, murmuring something about family discussion. As the front door closed behind him, Thomas turned to me, his expression a complex mixture of confusion, hurt, and something else. Perhaps the first glimmerings of recognition that the mother he thought he knew so completely had depths he'd never bothered to explore. Caroline collected the children and made a graceful exit, murmuring something about homework and an early meeting tomorrow. Thomas remained, his initial shock hardening into something more calculated as he poured himself a generous measure of Franklin's old scotch. "Let's talk about this rationally," he said, settling back onto the sofa. "I understand you might feel overwhelmed by this house sometimes. That's exactly why I've been suggesting the trust arrangement. You could stay here with proper support systems in place." I sipped my tea, allowing him to continue. "Those retirement communities aren't what you think, Mom. They start independent, sure, but they're designed to transition you into assisted living. Then full nursing care. They just want your money up front." "I've done considerable research," I replied calmly. "Lakeside Haven has an excellent reputation, transparent financial policies, and residents who've lived there happily for years. Sophia's sister moved there last spring and loves it." Thomas waved this aside. "Anecdotes aren't data. Have you even calculated what this would mean financially? The market's volatile right now. Selling could mean taking a significant loss on the property value." "I've consulted with 3 different realtors," I said. "They believe the house will sell quickly and at a fair price." His eyebrows rose. "3 realtors? When did you do all this?" "Over the past few months, while you were busy having Alan Prescott draw up trust documents without my knowledge." A flush crept up Thomas's neck. "That was meant to help you." "No," I said gently. "It was meant to help you feel in control of my assets." He set his glass down with more force than necessary. "That's unfair, Mom. I'm trying to protect your financial security." "I appreciate the concern," I maintained my calm tone. "But I've managed my finances successfully for decades. Your father and I made sound investments, and I've continued to do so since his passing." Thomas's expression shifted subtly. "What? Investments? Dad handled all the financial decisions." The misconception was so fundamental, yet so revealing. In Thomas's mind, I'd been merely a supportive presence in Franklin's financial world, not an active participant. "Your father and I made those decisions together," I corrected. "I balanced our household accounts, researched investment opportunities, and attended every meeting with our financial advisor. Just because I didn't discuss those details with you doesn't mean they didn't exist." He looked genuinely confused. "But Dad always talked about handling the investments." "Franklin was protective of my image with you," I explained. "He never wanted you to see me as anything other than your nurturing mother. That was his choice, not mine." The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken revelations. Thomas sipped his scotch, processing. "I don't understand why you'd want to leave this house," he finally said, his voice softer. "We have so many memories here." "And I'll take those memories with me," I assured him. "But memories don't require maintenance, heating bills, or climbing stairs with arthritic knees." "If it's the stairs, we could convert the downstairs study into a bedroom," he suggested quickly. "I know a contractor who—" "Thomas," I interrupted gently. "The house isn't the only issue. I'm ready for a change. New surroundings, new people, new experiences. I've spent 5 years living with ghosts. It's time to rejoin the living." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the family photographs arranged on the mantel. "You're really serious about this?" "I am. When would you list the house?" I hesitated, not ready to reveal the full truth. "Soon," I wanted to tell. "You first, give you time to adjust to the idea." Thomas nodded slowly, then straightened his shoulders. "Well, If you're determined to sell, at least let me handle the process. My firm works with top-tier real estate attorneys. We can ensure you get maximum value. His expression brightened with renewed purpose. In fact, Caroline's cousin just got her real estate license with Coldwell Banker. She could list it for you, keep it in the family, so to speak. And there it was, Thomas's need to manage, to control, reasserting itself in new form. I recognized the pattern from decades of watching him navigate challenges, personal and professional. Thomas didn't adapt to circumstances. He engineered circumstances to adapt to him. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I've already established a rapport with Crawford Realty. Ellen Crawford has specialized in historic homes for 20 years. His brow furrowed. Crawford? They're a small operation. You need someone with marketing power, connections. What I need, I said with gentle firmness, is someone who understands the unique value of this house and can find buyers who will appreciate it. Thomas opened his mouth to argue further, then closed it, perhaps finally sensing the resolute core beneath my mild exterior. He finished his scotch in a single swallow. I wish you'd discuss this with me sooner, he said, unable to fully conceal his frustration. I could have helped you evaluate options more thoroughly. I nodded, accepting the criticism without agreeing with its premise. It's getting late. Why don't you head home? Caroline will be wondering where you are. He rose reluctantly. We're not done discussing this, Mom. There are tax implications, capital gains considerations, timing issues with the market. He trailed off, seeing my unwavering expression. At least promise you won't sign anything without letting me review it first. Little did he know I'd already signed the most significant document of all. I promise I won't make any decisions without careful consideration, I offered instead, the careful wording lost on him. At the door, he turned back, conflict evident in his expression. You know I only want what's best for you, right? I know. You believe that, I said softly. After he left, I moved through the quiet house, turning off lights, locking doors, the nightly ritual performed thousands of times over decades. In the kitchen, I paused at the drawer where I kept household files. Inside was a folder labeled Lakeside Haven, containing brochures, floor plans, and the deposit receipt for my future home. I added the business card Alan Prescott had left behind, a wry smile touching my lips. The card joined similar ones Thomas had given me over months: financial advisors, estate attorneys, tax specialists, each representing his persistent belief that I needed management rather than autonomy. Upstairs, I opened my closet and began sorting clothes, another step in the quiet process of dismantling my life in this house. Each garment represented a memory: the blue dress from Thomas's law school graduation, the gardening smock stained with soil from 1,000 plantings, the cashmere sweater Franklin had given me on our last Christmas together. I worked methodically, creating separate piles, keep, donate, discard, making decisions without sentimentality. The woman Thomas thought he knew might have clung to these items, preserved them as talismans of the past. But I was ready to travel lighter into the future, carrying only what truly mattered. The coming days would require similar sorting of the life Thomas thought he understood, separating truth from assumption, independence from obligation, my needs from his expectations. The week following my announcement to Thomas passed in a whirlwind of activity. Each morning I tackled another section of the house, sorting, packing, occasionally pausing when memories threatened to overwhelm me. Sophia came regularly, bringing coffee and steadfast encouragement. "You're doing the right thing," she assured me repeatedly, helping to wrap heirloom china in tissue paper. Thomas called daily, each conversation following a similar pattern. He'd begin with casual inquiries about my progress, then gradually steer toward concerns about my plan. Had I considered the tax implications? Was I aware of current market conditions? Did I understand the fine print in retirement community contracts? I answered patiently, demonstrating more knowledge than he expected, which only seemed to intensify his determination to help. By Friday, he'd escalated to daily visits, arriving each evening after work with folders of information, market analyses, and alternative suggestions, all ultimately aimed at maintaining his influence over the house and, by extension, me. "I've found a perfect compromise," he announced on Saturday morning, appearing unannounced at my door with Caroline and a real estate brochure. "Garden Court condominiums, 3-minute drive from our house, single-level living, and a maintenance. Staff for the grounds. You could sell this place, avoid the retirement community fees, and still have considerable assets left." I invited them in for coffee, maintaining my composure as Thomas spread the brochure across my kitchen table. The condominiums looked pleasant enough, modern, efficient, convenient to Thomas's neighborhood. Everything a dutiful mother should want? "It's a thoughtful suggestion," I said, adding cream to my coffee. "I'll consider it." Caroline gave me a searching look. "You don't seem enthusiastic, Martha." I smiled at her perceptiveness. "It's a practical option, certainly. Just not what I've envisioned for myself." Thomas frowned. "Mom, I'm trying to find alternatives that make financial sense. Lakeside Haven will absorb a huge percentage of your assets for what? A glorified apartment and the promise of future care you may never need." "I've reviewed their financial structure thoroughly," I replied. "The investment is sound for what it provides: community, activities, security, and yes, care options if needed." He sighed dramatically. "At least promise me you'll tour Garden Court before making any final decisions. The developer's a client of mine. He'd show you personally." "I'll think about it," I said, neither committing nor refusing. After they left, I retreated to Franklin's office to finalize paperwork for the Historical Society donation, furniture and architectural elements I wanted preserved rather than sold. The afternoon passed quietly until the doorbell rang unexpectedly around 4 o'clock. I opened the door to find Richard Lockwood's assistant, a serious young woman named Janice, holding a manila envelope. "Mrs. Jenkins," Mr. Lockwood asked me to deliver these final documents for your review before the closing next week. She handed me the envelope. "He also wanted me to remind you about the walkthrough scheduled for Tuesday with the Hernandez family." I thanked her, glancing nervously over her shoulder to ensure Thomas hadn't returned. After she left, I took the envelope to the kitchen and spread the documents across the table: final closing papers, detailed instructions for the distribution of funds, and a letter from Elena and Miguel Hernandez expressing their continued excitement about the house. So absorbed was I in reviewing these materials that I didn't hear the front door open. Thomas had a key, of course, though he rarely used it without knocking first. "Mom, your car's here, but you didn't answer when I—" His voice halted abruptly as he entered the kitchen. I looked up to find him frozen in the doorway, eyes fixed on the papers spread before me. The bold, final closing statement header was clearly visible on the top document. "What is this?" he asked, voice unnaturally quiet. I gathered the papers calmly, though my heart raced. "Legal documents." "I can see that." He stepped closer. "Closing statement? Mom, what have you done?" The moment I'd been preparing for had arrived sooner than expected. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze directly. "I've sold the house, Thomas. The closing is next Thursday." His face drained of color. "That's impossible. You couldn't have—" "We've been discussing options for barely a week. I made this decision months ago," I said quietly. "The sale has been in process for 3 weeks." He snatched one of the documents, scanning it with increasing agitation. "Hernandez? Who are these people? And this price? It's well below market value. Mom, you've been swindled." "The price is fair," I maintained my calm. "The Hernandez family made a clean offer with no contingencies. They love the house and will care for it properly." Thomas paced the kitchen, running his hand through his hair. This can't be legal. You must have been pressured. We can contest this. I'll call Alan tonight. The sale is binding and entirely proper, I said. Richard Lockwood handled everything. Lockwood? Thomas spat the name. I knew he was behind this. He's practically senile, Mom. He's taken advantage of you. My patience, carefully maintained for days, finally thinned. That's enough, Thomas. Richard has been my attorney for decades. He's executed my wishes exactly as I directed him. Thomas stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Your wishes? To sell our family home behind my back? To make major financial decisions without even consulting me? Yes, I said simply. My wishes, my home, my financial decisions. But the trust documents, the estate planning we've been discussing, were never my priority, I finished for him. They were yours. He collapsed into a kitchen chair, the reality finally penetrating. I don't understand. Where is this money going? What are you planning to do? I considered how much to reveal. The full extent of my financial decisions would only intensify his reaction. Some will fund my residency at Lakeside Haven. The rest is allocated according to my priorities. Your priorities, he repeated bitterly. And what about family priorities? Dad would never have wanted this. Franklin and I discussed many possibilities for our later years, I said, including selling this house when it became impractical for one of us alone. You never mentioned those discussions to me. You never asked. The silence between us thickened. Thomas stared at the closing documents, then at me, as if trying to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the woman standing before him. $2 million, he finally said, focusing on the number that clearly troubled him most. And you made this decision entirely without me. Yes. After everything I've done, the research, the consultations with experts, the hours spent, planning for your future, planning for my money, I corrected gently. His head snapped up, anger flashing. That's unfair and untrue. I retrieved my phone from the counter, opened my email, and handed it to him. Third message down. You sent it to me by mistake 2 months ago. It was intended for your financial advisor. His face paled as he read his own words. Once we secure Mom's house in the trust, we'll have significant collateral for the vacation property investment. The equity alone should cover our initial costs. Thomas looked up, the righteous indignation draining from his expression. This was taken out of context. I was exploring options that would benefit everyone. I believe you thought that, I said quietly, retrieving my phone. But somewhere along the way, Thomas, you stopped seeing me as a person with my own wishes, and started seeing me as an asset to be managed. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, the truth of my words perhaps finally reaching him. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence between us, marking the moments of this long-delayed reckoning. Thomas left without resolution, his parting words a mixture of hurt and accusation. We'll discuss this more when you've had time to think clearly, he said, as if my decision represented some temporary lapse in judgment rather than months of careful planning. After he departed, the house felt charged with unsettled energy. I moved through the rooms restlessly, straightening items already organized, rearranging boxes already packed. When the walls seemed to close in around me, I called Sophia. He found out, I said simply when she answered. About the sale? How did he take it? About as well as you'd expect. He thinks I've been manipulated, swindled, or have possibly lost my mind. Come over, she said without hesitation. I've just made blueberry cobbler, the kind with the extra crumble topping you like. Sophia's home had always been a sanctuary of sorts, a cozy Cape Cod with cheerful yellow siding and window boxes overflowing with pansies. Unlike my historic Victorian with its formal architecture and antique furnishings, Sophia's house felt comfortably lived in, adorned with quilts she'd made herself and pottery crafted by her grandchildren. She met me at the door with a gentle hug and ushered me to her kitchen table where 2 bowls of still-warm cobbler waited alongside cups of fragrant tea. The normalcy of it, 2 old friends sharing dessert on a summer evening, provided exactly the grounding I needed. "Tell me everything," she said, passing me a napkin. I recounted the confrontation with Thomas, his shock at discovering the sale, his immediate assumption that I'd been taken advantage of. Sophia listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her expression thoughtful. "He's always seen you a certain way," she observed when I finished. "As his mother, of course, but also as someone lesser somehow. Someone to be managed rather than respected as an equal." "I enabled that perception," I admitted. "For years, I deferred to his professional expertise, acted impressed by his connections and knowledge. It seemed harmless, a way to make him feel valued, important." "Many mothers do the same," Sophia said. "We're conditioned to put our children's egos before our own needs. But at some point it becomes destructive," I finished. "To them as much as to us." We ate in contemplative silence for a moment. The cobbler was perfect. Sweet berries balanced by buttery topping. Comfort food in its purest form. "Do you remember Harold's mother?" Sophia asked suddenly, referring to her late husband. "Irene?" I nodded. Irene had been a formidable woman well into her 80s, sharp-minded and independent. When Harold tried to convince her to move in with us after her stroke, she refused outright. Said she'd rather hire help than become a burden. Sophia smiled at the memory. I was secretly relieved, though Harold was hurt. But she told me something I never forgot. She said, "The greatest gift I can give my son is not to become his responsibility." The wisdom of that statement resonated deeply. "I've been thinking along similar lines," I confessed. "Thomas sees this house, my assets, as his inheritance, something he's entitled to manage. But what if the true inheritance I should leave him is the example of aging with dignity and purpose?" "Exactly." Sophia reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Martha, in the 40 years I've known you, you've always put others first. Franklin, Thomas, your community work. You're finally choosing yourself, and it's throwing Thomas off balance because it doesn't fit his understanding of who you are. Or who he needs me to be," I added softly. We moved to Sophia's screened porch as evening settled, watching fireflies emerge in her garden. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the turbulent emotions of the afternoon. "What happens now?" Sophia asked, settling into her wicker rocker. "The closing is next Thursday. I'll move to Lakeside Haven the following Monday. Everything's arranged." I took a sip of fresh tea. "Thomas will continue to protest, of course. He may even try to interfere legally, though Richard assures me everything is properly executed." "And your relationship with Thomas?" I sighed, the question touching the core of my concern. "That's the unknown variable. I hope eventually he'll understand this isn't a rejection of him, but an affirmation of myself. He's not a child anymore. Martha, his feelings aren't your responsibility." "I know that intellectually," I admitted. "Emotionally is another matter." Sophia nodded, understanding the maternal impulse that never fully fades regardless of a child's age. "What about the money? $2 million is substantial. Has Thomas realized none of it is coming directly to him?" "Not yet. That revelation awaits after the closing." I hesitated, then continued. "I've established educational trusts for Eliza and James. The Historical Society will receive funds for preservation projects. I'm endowing a scholarship at the community college in Franklin's name. What remains will support me comfortably at Lakeside Haven, with some set aside for travel I've always wanted to do." Martha Jenkins, world traveler. Sophia's eyes twinkled. "I like the sound of that." "Nothing extravagant," I clarified. "The garden tour of England I've always dreamed about. Perhaps the autumn foliage in Vermont. Small adventures for a woman who's spent decades in one place. They sound perfect. Sophia's expression grew serious. You know Thomas will eventually ask why you didn't consult him about any of this. Have you prepared your answer? I nodded slowly. Because he stopped asking what I wanted and started telling me what I needed. Because he viewed me as an extension of his plans rather than a person with my own dreams. Because somewhere along the way, he forgot I existed before he did, and will continue existing in ways he hasn't bothered to imagine. Powerful realizations, Sophia murmured. And sad ones, I added. I raised him to be confident, capable, successful, and he is all those things. But I never taught him to listen, truly listen, to voices different from his own. That failure is partly mine. We all make mistakes as parents, Sophia said gently. The question is whether we recognize them in time to make amends. As darkness settled fully over the garden, we fell into comfortable silence. The rhythmic creaking of our rocking chairs marked time passing, each second taking me further from the life I'd known and closer to the one I'd chosen. Stay here tonight, Sophia offered eventually. The guest room's already made up. Give yourself this small sanctuary before returning to face whatever comes next. I accepted gratefully, recognizing the wisdom in retreating temporarily from the emotional battlefield my home had become. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges. Thomas's continued objections, practical matters of packing, the bittersweet task of saying goodbye to spaces that had witnessed my happiest moments and deepest sorrows. But tonight, in the peaceful embrace of true friendship, I could rest in the certainty that while the path ahead might be difficult, it was undeniably mine to walk. I returned to my house the following morning with renewed resolve. The confrontation with Thomas had been painful, but necessary. A long overdue recognition of the divide between how he perceived me and who I truly was. Sophia's insights and unwavering support had strengthened my conviction that I was making the right choice, not just for my practical future, but for my emotional well-being. The house felt different somehow, as if the walls themselves had registered yesterday's revelation. I moved through the rooms with purposeful energy, no longer tentative about dismantling the life I'd built here. Today's focus was the library, Franklin's favorite room and mine, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves he'd crafted himself. I'd barely begun sorting when my phone rang. Caroline's name appeared on the screen, surprising me. Thomas's wife rarely called independently of him. Martha? Her voice held an unusual hesitancy. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, I assured her. I'm just organizing books. Thomas told me about yesterday. She paused. He's quite upset. I imagine he is, I acknowledged, waiting to see which direction this conversation would take. Caroline had always been pleasant but somewhat distant. Our relationship defined primarily through Thomas rather than any direct connection. He wanted to come over this morning, she continued, but I suggested he give you both some space to process. Another pause. Actually, I'm calling because, well, I wondered if I might stop by. Just me. There are things I'd like to say, privately. Request was unexpected. Of course, I said. I'll make fresh coffee. An hour later, Caroline arrived, elegant as always in casual weekend attire, but with a tension in her shoulders that betrayed her discomfort. I welcomed her into the kitchen, the heart of the home, and a space that had always facilitated honest conversation. Thank you for seeing me, she said, accepting the offered coffee. Thomas doesn't know I'm here. I raised an eyebrow. A secret meeting? She smiled faintly. More like a conversation between women that doesn't need male management. The subtle critique of Thomas's controlling tendencies surprised me. Caroline had always presented a united front with my son in family matters. Martha, she began, cupping her mug with both hands, I want you to know that while Thomas is struggling with your decision, I understand it. More than he realizes, perhaps more than you might expect. You do? She nodded, her gaze direct. My mother sold our family home after my father died. I was furious at the time, felt betrayed, as if she were erasing our history. I said terrible things to her. She looked down briefly. I was 26 and thought I knew everything. What happened? I asked, intrigued by this glimpse into Caroline's past. She moved to Arizona, joined a painting class, made new friends, and gradually, I saw her transform from my sad, dependent mother into a woman with her own life. Caroline's eyes met mine. It took years, but eventually I understood. Her choice wasn't about rejecting our past. It was about claiming her future. The parallel to my situation was striking. Does Thomas know this story? He knows the outline, but not how it changed my perspective. She hesitated. Thomas is rigid in certain ways. He sees family as a hierarchy with clear roles. You've always been the nurturing mother, the keeper of tradition, the emotional support. And now I'm stepping outside that role, I observed. Exactly. It threatens his understanding of how things should be. She leaned forward. I'm not defending his behavior, Martha. The way he's approached your finances, this house, it's been presumptuous, controlling. I've told him so, though he doesn't hear it. This candid assessment from my daughter-in-law was unexpected. I appreciate your honesty, I said carefully. I've worried about damaging my relationship with Thomas. That relationship needs to evolve, Caroline said firmly, for both your sakes, and perhaps this is the catalyst, however uncomfortable. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. I brought something for you. I found it last night while Thomas was pacing and ranting about lawyers. I unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver compass, its face yellowed with age but still functional. It was my mother's, Caroline explained. She gave it to me after she moved, said it represented her new direction. I'd like you to have it now. The gesture moved me deeply. Caroline, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Just know that while Thomas may struggle to understand your choices, I respect them. She smiled. And I'll work on him. Subtly, of course. After she left, I placed the compass on my bedside table and returned to sorting books with renewed purpose. Caroline's visit had provided an unexpected alliance, a reminder that not everyone viewed my decisions through Thomas's narrow lens. That afternoon, I called Richard Lockwood with a new instruction, one I'd been contemplating since my conversation with Sophia. Are you certain? He asked after I explained my request. It's a significant change to the disbursement plan. I'm certain, I confirmed. The educational trusts for my grandchildren remain unchanged. The Historical Society donation proceeds as planned. But I want to establish a separate fund. Call it the New Beginnings Fund. It would be accessible to Thomas and Caroline in 5 years, with one condition attached. And that condition? Richard asked. That they use it to pursue something they've always wanted but never prioritized. Travel, education, creative pursuits. Something that expands their lives rather than their investment portfolio. Richard's chuckle carried through the phone. A thoughtful provocation, Martha. I'll draw up the paperwork. By evening, I'd filled 8 boxes with books, some for Lakeside Haven, others for donation, a special selection for Thomas and the grandchildren. The process had been liberating rather than sorrowful, each decision a step toward my reimagined future. As twilight softened the edges of the day, I sat in Franklin's old armchair by the library window, the silver compass resting in my palm. Its needle pointed steadily north, unwavering despite the turbulence surrounding it. I'm finding my true north, Franklin? I whispered to the empty room. Better late than never. In that moment of quiet reflection, I felt something shift within me. A final release of doubt, a full embracing of the path ahead. The sale would proceed. Lakeside Haven awaited. Whatever relationship remained with Thomas would need to be built on new foundations of mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was placing my own needs at the center of my decisions, not selfishly, but authentically. The revelation wasn't that I'd discovered new strength, but that I'd finally acknowledged the strength that had been there all along. Tuesday morning arrived with perfect clarity, both in weather and in my resolve. Today was the scheduled walkthrough. With the Hernandez family, a crucial step before Thursday's closing. I'd dressed with particular care in a tailored blue dress that Franklin had always admired, applied light makeup, and arranged my silver hair neatly. The woman in the mirror looked composed, dignified, and unmistakably in command of her decisions. Richard Lockwood had called earlier, warning me that Thomas had contacted his office, demanding information about the sale. He's not entitled to those details, Richard had assured me, but you should be prepared for potential intervention. Ellen Crawford arrived promptly at 10, her practical sedan followed by the Hernandez family's minivan. I watched from the front window as Miguel helped Elena from the passenger seat, their 3 children spilling out excitedly behind them. The youngest, a girl about 7, carried a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for their future home. I opened the door before they reached it, welcoming them with a warmth that reflected my genuine pleasure in their excitement. Mrs. Jenkins, Elena embraced me lightly. The house looks even more beautiful than I remembered. Martha, please, I corrected gently. After all, you're buying my home. We should be on a first-name basis. The walkthrough proceeded smoothly. Ellen guided us room by room, confirming which fixtures would remain, noting minor repairs to be completed before closing. The Hernandez children moved through the spaces with respectful curiosity, the oldest boy asking thoughtful questions about the home's history. "Is this original woodwork?" he asked, running his hand along the library's built-in shelving. "My husband crafted those," I explained. "Franklin was a talented woodworker. These shelves have held our books for 40 years. They're beautiful," the boy said with genuine appreciation. "Dad, can we keep them exactly like this?" Miguel nodded. "Of course. Craftsmanship like this deserves preservation." Their obvious respect for the home Franklin and I had lovingly maintained eased the bittersweetness of the transition. These were the right stewards for our legacy. We had just entered the sunroom when the front door opened forcefully. I turned to find Thomas striding in, briefcase in hand, his expression thunderous. Behind him, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses followed, clutching a leather portfolio similar to Alan Prescott's. "Mom?" Thomas's voice carried sharply across the space. "We need to talk immediately." Elena Hernandez stepped closer to me, her expression concerned. Ellen Crawford moved forward professionally. "Excuse me, sir. We're in the middle of a scheduled walkthrough. If you'd like to make an appointment—" "I'm Thomas Jenkins," he interrupted. "Mrs. Jenkins's son, an attorney, and this," he gestured to the man behind him, "is Martin Wells from Marshall and Greenberg. We have serious concerns about the legality of this transaction." The atmosphere in the room chilled instantly. Miguel placed a protective arm around his youngest daughter, who had begun to look frightened. "Thomas," I spoke firmly, moving to the center of the room, "this is inappropriate and unnecessary. Please leave and call me later." "I'm afraid this can't wait," he insisted, opening his briefcase on a nearby table. "Mr. Wells has reviewed the situation and believes there are grounds to challenge this sale based on undue influence and possible diminished capacity." A collective gasp rose from the Hernandez family. Ellen Crawford stepped forward, her professional demeanor unwavering. "Those are serious allegations, Mr. Jenkins. Do you have documentation supporting these claims?" "We're preparing the filing," Thomas replied. "In the meantime, I've advised the title company of potential litigation, which should halt Thursday's closing pending resolution." The room tilted slightly as I absorbed the implications of Thomas's words. He was actually attempting to legally block the sale by suggesting I was mentally incompetent. The audacity, the betrayal, momentarily stole my voice. Richard Lockwood's voice filled the silence as he entered from the hallway. That would be an ill-advised course of action, Thomas. I hadn't heard him arrive, but his presence was a welcome reinforcement. He carried a sleek leather briefcase of his own, his bow tie perfectly straight despite the tension vibrating through the room. Lockwood, Thomas acknowledged coldly. Your involvement in this matter is exactly what concerns us. My involvement, Richard corrected, has been as Martha's attorney, executing her clearly expressed wishes, which she has consistently maintained over months of careful planning. He turned to the Hernandez family with a reassuring nod. The closing will proceed as scheduled. Mr. Jenkins has no legal standing to interfere with his mother's properly executed decisions regarding her own property. Thomas's face flushed with anger. We'll see about that. Mom, he turned to me. I'm trying to protect you from making a catastrophic mistake. The moment had arrived, the confrontation I'd anticipated and dreaded, but standing amid the wreckage of Thomas's ambitions, surrounded by the family who would give our home new life, I found my voice with unexpected steadiness. The only mistake, I said clearly, would be allowing your sense of entitlement to override my autonomy. This house is mine to sell, Thomas, and I have. The confrontation with Thomas had been more painful than I anticipated, but ultimately necessary. Richard Lockwood had managed the situation with professional calm, ushering the startled Hernandez family into another room while he spoke privately with Thomas and the attorney he'd brought. I didn't hear their conversation, but Thomas emerged. From the study looking deflated, his righteous indignation replaced by grim acceptance. Richard had apparently shown him documentation that effectively eliminated any legal grounds for challenging the sale, including my recent comprehensive cognitive assessment, notarized statements regarding my independent decision-making, and evidence of Thomas's emails revealing his financial interest in controlling my assets. The closing will proceed as scheduled, Richard informed me after Thomas departed. I don't anticipate further interference. The Hernandez family had been understandably shaken, but Ellen Crawford's steady professionalism helped restore their confidence in the transaction. By the time they left, Elena was once again discussing garden plans, and Miguel was measuring windows for treatments. The children's resilience served as a reminder that life continues, adapts, flows forward despite momentary turbulence. The days between the walkthrough and closing passed with methodical activity. I finalized packing, arranged for donations to be collected, and coordinated with the moving company that would transport my carefully selected possessions to Lakeside Haven. Sophia worked alongside me, her presence a steady comfort through the emotional currents of dismantling a lifetime. "Have you heard from Thomas?" she asked on Wednesday as we wrapped the last of my grandmother's china. Caroline called. She said he's processing, whatever that means. I secured a piece of tape over the box. She'll bring the children to say, "Goodbye on Friday. Thomas may or may not come." Sophia nodded without comment, understanding the complicated emotions at play. Thursday's closing proceeded without drama. I signed the necessary documents, formally transferring ownership of 1847 Maple Avenue to the Hernandez family. When Richard handed me the cashier's check, tangible evidence of the transaction's completion, I felt an unexpected lightness. The funds would secure my future while enabling generosity toward causes and people I valued. That evening, I stood in the nearly empty house, surrounded by labeled boxes and the few pieces of furniture I'd kept. Tomorrow the movers would come. By afternoon, I would hand over the keys and walk away from the home that had sheltered 4 decades of my life. I moved through each room one final time, touching door frames, window latches, the banister Franklin had hand-sanded to silky smoothness. Not to cling to the past, but to honor it properly before releasing it. In my bedroom, I opened the closet one last time, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. A faint scent of Franklin's aftershave still lingered in the cedar-lined space, 5 years after his passing. I inhaled deeply, capturing the memory, then closed the door firmly. "Goodbye, old friend," I whispered to the empty house. "Thank you for everything." The future beckoned, not as a diminishment of what had been, but as an unexplored territory of new possibilities. I was ready. Friday morning brought an unexpected peace. The movers arrived early, efficiently loading my carefully labeled boxes and selected furniture pieces into their truck. By noon, the house stood empty of my possessions, but still vibrant with memories, a vessel ready for new life to fill its spaces. I sat on the window seat in what had been our bedroom, gazing out at the garden where later generations of the roses Franklin planted still bloomed. The doorbell's chime startled me from my reverie. Caroline had arrived with Eliza and James to say goodbye. The children entered tentatively, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. This marked the first time they'd seen the house emptied of the furnishings that had defined their grandmother's home. "Where's everything going?" James asked, his adolescent voice cracking slightly. "Most of it has already gone to new homes," I explained. "I'm taking just what I need for my apartment at Lakeside Haven." "Dad said you sold the house because you're mad at him," Eliza ventured, her 14-year-old directness refreshing amid so much adult circumlocution. I patted the window seat beside me, inviting her to sit. "This isn't about anger, Eliza. It's about making choices that are right for me at this stage of my life." "But why didn't you tell Dad first?" she persisted. "He was really upset." "Sometimes," I said carefully, "adults forget to listen to each other. Your father and I have different ideas about what I need. I made my decision based on what will make me happy." Caroline, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "Your grandmother is teaching us all something important about independence, Eliza. About making choices based on your own needs, not others' expectations." I gave her a grateful smile, appreciating the support. "Will we still see you?" James asked, his voice smaller suddenly, revealing the child still present beneath the teenage exterior. "Of course," I assured him. "Lakeside Haven is only 20 miles away. You can visit any time. There's a lovely lake for fishing, gardens to explore, even a workshop where I'll be teaching crafts, and I'll come to your games and recitals just as always." The tension in both children visibly eased. Caroline handed me a small gift bag. "From all of us," she said. "Thomas wanted to come, but—" "I understand," I said, though part of me ached at his absence. Inside the bag was a beautifully framed photograph, not a formal portrait, but a candid shot from last Christmas. Franklin and I sat together by the fireplace, surrounded by Thomas, Caroline, and the children, all laughing at some forgotten joke. Our last holiday together as a complete family. "Thomas found it when going through old photos," Caroline explained. "He thought you might want it for your new place." The gesture, so simple yet profound, suggested a tentative olive branch from my son. Not forgiveness exactly, nor full understanding, but acknowledgement that our connection remained despite the rupture. "Thank him for me," I said softly, carefully wrapping the frame in tissue paper and placing it in my handbag. The last item, to leave this house in my possession, a bridge between past and future. 1 month after leaving my family home, I stood on the balcony of my apartment at Lakeside Haven, watching autumn paint the trees surrounding the water. My container garden was already taking shape, herbs in terracotta pots, chrysanthemums adding bursts of color, and small rose bushes I'd started from cuttings of Franklin's original plants. Inside, my new space reflected a carefully curated collection from my previous life. Franklin's reading chair positioned by the window, our wedding portrait on the wall, the quilt my grandmother had made draped across the bed. But there were new elements, too. Art I'd purchased during a weekend excursion with my painting class, photographs of newfound friends from the community's welcome dinner, craft supplies organized in the custom shelving unit I'd helped design in the woodworking. Shop. My phone chimed with a text message from Sophia, who had joined me for lunch twice weekly since my move. Book club tonight? Margaret's bringing that lemon cake you liked. I smiled and replied affirmatively. The rhythm of my days had established itself with surprising ease: morning walks around the lake, volunteer hours at the community's library, afternoon crafting, sessions where I'd begun teaching others the skills Franklin had once taught me. Evenings brought social activities or quiet time with books I'd long meant to read but never found time for. A knock at my door interrupted these reflections. I opened it to find Thomas standing there, looking uncertain, a manila envelope clutched in his hands. "Mom," he said, his voice lacking its usual authority. "May I come in?" I welcomed him, noting how his eyes moved curiously over my apartment, taking in the evidence of my thriving new existence. "It's nice," he admitted, seeming surprised. "Brighter than I expected." "The southern exposure makes all the difference," I replied, offering him coffee, which he accepted. We sat at my small dining table, the awkwardness between us palpable but less charged than during our last encounter. "I received the trust documents yesterday," he said finally, tapping the envelope, "for Eliza and James's education, and the other fund." I nodded, waiting. 5 years, he continued, until Caroline and I can access it, for something we've always wanted but never prioritized. He quoted Richard's phrasing with a hint of his old skepticism. "Do you understand why?" I asked gently. He looked down at his coffee. "You want us to think beyond financial security, beyond conventional success." A pause. "Like you've done." "Exactly." Thomas sighed, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since the confrontation. "I was wrong, Mom. Not about everything. I still believe financial planning is important, but about how I approached it, about assuming I knew best." The admission clearly cost him, his lawyer's pride tempered by belated self-awareness. "I know," I said simply. We talked for another hour, not resolving everything, but beginning to establish a new foundation. Before leaving, Thomas asked hesitantly if he and Caroline might come for dinner the following week. "We could bring takeout," he offered. "Get to know your new place." As I closed the door behind him, I felt the final piece of my transition settle into place. The house on Maple Avenue now belonged to the Hernandez family. My relationship with Thomas was evolving toward something more balanced, if still tender. And I had created a life that honored both my past and my present, without being imprisoned by either. Standing once more on my balcony, watching the sunset transform the lake's surface to burnished gold, I whispered to the evening air, "We did it, Franklin. We raised a son, built a home, created a life, and now I'm creating another." The breeze lifted my hair gently, like a loving hand, and I smiled at the future stretching before me, different from anything I had imagined, but entirely, wonderfully mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.